So in my hands here, I hold the brand new DJI Osmo Action 3. And what I'm going to do in today's video is I'm going to do a complete unboxing of the Action 3. And I'm going to show you everything that comes with the camera. And then I'm going to show you how to update the firmware. I'm going to go through all of the menu options on the camera to show you how to set those up. And I'm also going to go through the best settings that I recommend for this camera to get the very best footage straight out of the camera without the need to edit. And for your ease of navigation in this video, I've created a complete table of contents below. So if there are sections that you want to skip over and sections that are more relevant to you, feel free to skip ahead. So for the unboxing and camera setup portion of this video, I'm going to set up another camera for your ease of viewing and so that you can see everything up close. So first thing we're going to do here is we're going to pull the plastic off. DJI makes it pretty easy to do so up here at the top. And what we're going to do to open the box is we're going to pull on this tab right here with the down arrow, right here. Once we've done that, it's going to fold open right here. And inside, it's really nice. The instructions they have here, kind of a quick start guide. So what they have here is they have the QR code that you can scan to install the DJI Mimo app. And then it shows you some basic instructions here of how to get started. And I'm going to show you how to do that on the actual camera. So this obviously right here is the camera. And I'm going to pull it out and set it aside. We'll get all the stickers pulled off that in a moment. And underneath here, we've got some of our accessories that come with the camera and some DJI stickers, some silica gel, and we've got the official DJI battery for the camera. This battery is a 1770 milliamp hours battery, and DJI has competed with other action cameras with this battery because DJI puts an emphasis on not only the charge time of the battery. They do say it'll last up to 180 minutes in 1080p, 60 frames per second. But the battery also does particularly well in cold. And this battery is supposed to be similar to the Enduro battery from GoPro. It's not supposed to die or lose charge quickly in the cold. It's supposed to perform well. And we've also got a USB-C to USB-C charging cable. A lot of manufacturers still have a USB-A to C, but things are definitely going in the direction of C, so I like seeing a C to C. And we've got a mount that comes with the camera. And I'll show you later on how to attach this. This mount is magnetic, and it does attach to the bottom of the camera magnetically. And on the bottom here, it's got some instructions. Don't apply to curved surfaces. Attach and press down firmly. Wait 30 minutes before use. And then it talks about the application temperature. That's because this is a sticky mount. I'm going to leave that on there for now because I don't prefer to mount it to my desk at this time. And then it's of course got the thumb screw here that allows you to change the angle of this. And it is worth noting this particular type of mounting system here is compatible with several accessories from other action camera makers as well. And we've also got a case in here. And it looks like we have an extra rubber seal, which I'm guessing is going to go on the lens cover here. Yep. So if this one gets worn out, you've got an extra that DJI included. Which, by the way, it is worth noting that the lens cover on the Action 3 is replaceable. So unlike the Action 2, where if you damage that lens, you could not replace it, you were done. You would have to send it into DJI for hardware repair. This lens cover here is removable and replaceable. So if you drop this, smash it into something while you're out having a good time with the camera, it's very cheap and easy to replace. You can just order a new one from DJI and pop it on. I'll show you how to remove that later on here. But back to this case. This case right here is going to primarily be if you want to vertical mount this. So in order to vertical mount this camera, it does have to be in the case. I'll show you that later on as well. Otherwise, there's not really a compelling reason to use this case. It kind of gets in the way. It does block the battery door, so you're not able to replace the battery without taking it out of the case and swapping it out. So unless you're vertical shooting, I don't necessarily recommend using this case, but it's nice of DJI to include it by default. We're gonna move this out of the way, and we're gonna pull off some stickers here. DJI does a good job putting arrows on stuff to show you where to pull. All right, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to show you what some of these buttons are on the camera and what the doors do. So the first button here, this one on top, this is going to primarily be your record button. So you're going to hit this when you want to start recording or when you want to take a picture. And over here on the side, we have the mode button, and this also powers on the camera. So if you long press it, it's going to power on the camera. If you tap it once quickly, it's going to switch between the video and photo modes. This door right down here is going to be your USB-C door. And to open it, you just press down on the arrow and you lift it up. And that is your USB port. So this is going to be what you use for charging this. And it's also going to be for plugging it into a computer if you want to get the files off your microSD card directly that way. And to close it, you just push it back up and just make sure it's all sealed here. On the bottom, we've got the mounting system. So I will show you how to do that. It is a magnetic mount, like I mentioned, so that's great. I'm glad DJI kept that. So you've got the logo here. The way you want to mount it is you want to have the logo facing toward the front of the camera. So where you see Action 3, you also want the DJI logo facing in the same direction. And in order to release this, you just squeeze in on each side here and pull out. The magnet is quite strong, so you're not likely to have your camera easily detach from that. And if you try to put it on the other way, it won't let you. The magnets are going to repel. So the easy way to put this on is just remember the DJI logo faces the front of the camera. Going around to the other side of the camera here. Right here, if we push up on this, which is, by the way, really nice that they have the arrows pointing in the direction you need to push it. This is going to be our battery door, and this is also going to be where our microSD card goes. So what I'm going to do here starting off is I'm going to get the battery in. So the way the battery goes in, these tabs right here that you see on the bottom, these are going to go down on the bottom as well when you put it in. They need to line up with the connector down in there. We're going to push it in. And when you want to pull out the battery, you've got this nice little tab right here you can just pull out on. So this is also a good point to put in the microSD card. So let me go grab one of those. And I got a brand new one here that I'm going to use with the DJI Action 3, which, by the way, I highly recommend SanDisk Extreme cards to use with this camera. There are a couple different brands that DJI says will work with this and are recommended, but I've always had the best luck with action cameras with the SanDisk Extreme, and this one definitely meets the requirements for reading and writing. It's got read speeds up to 190 megabytes per second and write speeds up to 130 megabytes per second. And size-wise, I recommend having at least 64 gigabyte card, but really to have the best experience with this camera and to not run out of space, I recommend having at least 128. Now in this case I have a 256 because the price difference is not that significant between this and the 128, so I got the 256. So in order to put in the microSD card, it is important that you have the text right here facing toward the battery. It's going to click into place like that, and you'll know you have it seated when it's not sticking out anymore here. If you try to put it in the other way, it's not going to allow you to press it in. If you keep pressing, it will break the card. So make sure you put it in correctly. Then we're going to close the door here. And all you have to do to close the door is just push down in the opposite direction. So what we're going to do next is we're going to power this on and go through the firmware update process. But before I do that, I'm going to show you how to get the DJI Mimo app, because you will need that app in order to activate this camera for the first time. And it's going to also push the firmware update. So we're going to go through that process next. What you want to do is you want to take your phone and you want to scan this QR code that I showed you at the beginning. It's going to be that QR code under number 1. When you scan that, it's going to bring that up in the App Store here. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to install it. Now, I have pre-installed it for the sake of this video to make things a little bit faster. So we're going to open this app and we're going to agree to the terms of use. They have an option if you want to join the DJI Product Improvement Project. I'm going to click Not Now. And we'll allow this. We'll allow it to connect to devices and use Bluetooth, because that's going to be important for the sake of updating the firmware. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn on the camera. And I'm going to show you what the screen's going to show here. So the first thing we're going to see is we're going to see the language. I'm going to select English. So on the app, we're going to click where it says tap here to connect to a device. Up in the upper left here. And it says Osmo device found. We're going to click connect. And it's going to search. And what we're going to do is we're going to accept here. It's got the verification code, which matches on my phone. I'm going to click accept there. And it's going to have us accept the terms of use on the phone here. And on the phone, we're going to want to click Get Osmo Device Info down here at the bottom, and then click Next. And it's going to ask you to log in. If you don't already have a DJI account, you're going to want to create that here. And you would do that by clicking Register at the top. I do already have a DJI account, so I'm going to log in here. All right, and once we've logged in, it's going to ask us to confirm the account info and then click Activate. And it's going to proceed to activate. And it's going to ask you if you want the DJI Care Refresh. And I did not purchase DJI Care Refresh with this, so I'm actually going to click Skip up here. If you did, then you want to select that at the bottom, or you can actually purchase the plan there at the bottom as well if you want to. All right, so activation was successful. And it's going to go to the next screen here. It's going to ask you if you want to answer a few short questions. I am not going to do that right now. I'm going to click Exit. All right, so we're going to click Get Started now. And this is going to go through what all of the buttons are, some of the screen gestures, some of the other new features here. And it's going to tell you, make sure you update your firmware regularly. We're going to click Next. And then this is where it's going to start with the firmware update. So I'm going to keep the camera right here so you can see it during the firmware update process. And down here at the bottom, there is the option to download firmware automatically when connected to Wi-Fi. I definitely recommend doing that. As far as what's new, it's got a bunch of features here that are listed, which is typical of the initial firmware for most cameras. I'm not going to read through all of those, but it is a very good idea to update the firmware right out of the box, because it's going to have a lot of really important stuff in it. And this one definitely does. Now, the firmware size is fairly large at 138.5, so it can take a little bit to download. So I'm going to skip ahead here and not waste your time just watching the percentages count up. And by the way, something I'll mention while we're waiting on the firmware, you can see the battery charge looks pretty good here. The battery indicator's in the upper right here. It is worth noting, though, that DJI says at least a 15% charge is required in the battery before the firmware will update. Now, I recommend having it a little bit higher because you don't want your camera to power off in the middle of a firmware update. That could potentially break your camera, and you would not want to have to send that in to DJI for that problem. I recommend having at least 30 to 50% charge on your battery before doing a firmware update. All right, so now that it's at 50%, it's going to give us the option to install the firmware. So we're going to click Install. And it's going to say device is not connected, so we're going to click Connect. It's going to search. It's going to find our camera. We're going to click Connect here. And then we're going to click Join. And it's going to do a Wi-Fi connection between your phone and the Action 3. This is how it's going to push that firmware update that it downloaded. And it's going to start installing, so this is what you're going to see on the camera while it installs. And it moves along pretty quickly. That Wi-Fi connection between your phone and camera is usually very speedy. And on the camera, it's going to tell us to wait about 2 minutes. And that light up there is going to flash red and green while it updates. And I think we're getting close to the end now. All right, it says update success on the phone, and the camera is probably going to reboot in a moment here. All right, so the camera has rebooted, the firmware has installed successfully, and we can click done on the phone. And then it's going to flash the green updated on the camera. So now that we're done installing that firmware, it's time to dive into the menu on here and get all of that set up and configured. So I'm going to show you each and every menu option so you can make sure that it's set up the way you need it to be to get the best possible user experience and footage from this camera. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to swipe down. Swiping down takes us to this main kind of general settings menu here. So we're going to click on this icon here first. And this is where you're going to create and manage custom modes. So we're going to come back to that later on once we get some of those settings set up. But there's going to be some different options where you can save custom modes to easily toggle between them. This next menu here is the quick switch menu. So if you click on that, this is where you can enable things such as voice prompt. And you can also do screen switch. And that's going to enable the single screen preview. I don't recommend setting that. I recommend having it on both screens. I recommend having it here on the front and the back. But if you click confirm, it's going to only have it on the back screen. So we're going to toggle that off. And then for quick switch, it's going to have photo, video, slow motion mode, and time lapse and hyperlapse. So these are the ones that are going to be available when you do the mode button right here to switch between them. So I recommend keeping video and photo in there, unless you're not going to ever take any pictures with this camera, in which case you can turn photo off. But I recommend having photo, video, slow motion, time lapse, and hyperlapse. For playback, I don't usually keep that in here because playback is kind of a separate function. You're not doing any recording with that. So I recommend keeping that off. There's a different way to get to playback later on, which I will show you. Next option here is for brightness. 100% is going to drain your battery faster, so I recommend bringing this down a little bit. I like to do around 80 to 85. I'm going to keep that at 80 there. It doesn't need to be 100% brightness. Typically, 80% is more than enough. So this menu here has a lot of different options on it. The first one here, SnapShot. It's going to allow you to select your mode there. I recommend keeping that at video. And we already talked about this one here with the single screen preview. For voice control, if you want to set that up on here, you can turn it on and then you just want to select your language. My language is English, but I don't usually recommend using voice control. I find that feature can be kind of buggy. It doesn't always work. It has come a long way. I personally don't use it, but if you want to use it, you would just turn it on here. And then down here, it's going to show you the list of voice commands that you can say. And if you say these to the camera, it's going to proceed and start doing those. I'm going to turn voice control off as I do not use this. One of the new things on the Action 3 is the scuba diving mode, which will automatically come on if you're below 14 meters. I'm not going to be doing any scuba diving, but if you are, you should turn this on. And it's going to tell you right here. In scuba diving mode, press shutter record button or quick switch to start recording. And then press quick switch to stop recording. And then you would press the shutter record button 5 times to disable the scuba diving mode. So I'm going to click cancel. I don't want to enable that. For the wireless connection, the wireless info is here. This is your device name and password. You don't usually have to change that unless you want to change the password, and then you would have to update it on your phone for connecting to the camera. For Wi-Fi frequency, I recommend keeping it at 5.8. That's going to work a lot better than the 2.4. and that's not going to be subject to the same type of interference that 2.4 would be. And then if you ever need to reset the Wi-Fi connection, you would click this down here. Down here for video compression, it's really important to have this set properly. I recommend doing HEVC because HEVC is going to offer the best detail. You're going to get the highest quality video, and it's going to be the kind of a balance between quality and file size, but HEVC is going to give you the best quality. For sounds, you can adjust the volume how you would like to. I generally recommend medium. I find that high is a little bit too loud, so we're going to put it to medium. For the grid, I like to have this on. It helps with that rule of thirds, so we're going to turn the grid on. For the naming management, it's kind of nice. They allow you, if you want to use a custom naming structure, you can use that. This is going to be when you write files to your MicroSD card. So you can do a bunch of different options here. Change this and it's going to update that. I generally keep that default, but if you have a reason to change it, then by all means do so. And there's an option where you can turn off the screen when recording. Generally, I don't recommend doing that because even if you're recording for a long time, you don't generally want the screen to go off. Yes, that will save battery life, but you also won't be able to see what you're recording. Now, the only time you might want to do that is if you have your phone with the DJI app and you're recording via that, then you might want to have the screen off here to save battery. But if you're just using this camera without your phone, you're going to want to keep that screen on. Auto power off, I generally keep that to 5 minutes. That way if I accidentally leave it on, it's not going to stay on too long, but 30 seconds is a little bit too strict. For the LED, I recommend keeping that on. I like to have that LED. For horizon calibration, I'll do that right now. I generally recommend doing this the first time before you use the camera. If you notice that things are not going well with the horizon leveling, it's a good idea to do this as well if that's not working properly. But it shouldn't be something you have to do very often. Continue last live stream option. This is going to be if you're using this for live streaming. This is going to be through the app. That's more of an option you just click to. That's not going to be an option right now because we don't have any live streams yet. Language, English. The date and time is going to auto set up with your app on your phone. So you're not going to have to change that manually. And then you've got the format option, which it's a great idea the first time you put the microSD card into your Action 3 to give it a format. So we're going to swipe and format it. It's going to say formats in progress, don't remove SD card. I recommend formatting your card about once every month. It's going to keep that card working well with your camera. I find that files are less likely to get corrupted when this is formatted once in a while. It is important to note you're going to want to back up your data from it though, because every time you format, it's going to delete the files on the card. If you ever have to do a factory reset, you're going to click confirm here. I'm not going to click that. That's going to wipe out all of our settings and take it back to the way it started. Generally, you should only have to do that if your camera is like having a lot of issues and you need to do a reset to narrow it down to make sure it's not corruption. And if you need your device info, if you ever need your serial number, that's going to be right here, and your firmware version, and the quick start guide is all going to be there as well. And one last thing I wanted to show you was how to remove the lens cover here. So to remove it, you're going to pull off this rubber and you're going to twist to the left while pulling up slightly on this. And this is simply going to screw off, and it's got threads on there. It's a pretty good design. It's great, and it protects the lens. You want to make sure you don't get any dust underneath this on that lens, as that would mess with your footage. So it's a good idea to always keep this on. But if this does get cracked or scratched or damaged, it's nice and easy to get a new one of these and replace it. And when you're putting it back on, you want to make sure it's on nice and snug. That's going to help ensure this is kept waterproof. And it's a good idea to put the rubber back on here when you're done. Next menu, we're going to click right down here. This is for the orientation lock, on or off. I recommend keeping orientation lock on. That way, if you turn the camera, it's not going to go vertical automatically. It's going to stay horizontal. If you are going to want to be doing some vertical video, where you're filming like this, you may want to keep that turned off. But I don't like the orientation in the menus changing on me, so I'm going to keep that turned on. Next button here is to lock the screen. Generally, you're not going to want to have that locked unless you're in scuba diving mode, so I'm going to swipe up to unlock it. This is just simply a menu to enable or disable the voice control, what we already looked at in the menu up here. And then this right here, you can enable or disable the full front screen display. So that's referring to this right here, which is nice. It's touchscreen on the front now. If you want the full front screen display, like where you can see yourself on there, if you're vlogging, you know, holding this facing toward you, it's a good idea to have it enabled. If you're not ever going to use it, then I recommend disabling it. In my case, I'm going to keep it enabled because there will probably be situations where I want to see what's going on from the front screen. So I'm going to have it turned on. All right, so that was that menu there. Before we go to the next settings, I just want to show you this up here is the SD card. It shows how much space is left on it. This over here is the battery charge. So our battery is already getting kind of low. This is the battery charge the way it came out of box. So I am going to plug that in and charge it soon. It is worth noting that with the Action 3, DJI has stated you can take this battery from 0 to 80% in 18 minutes. Now that's a very fast charge, and that's with this plugged in via the USB-C cable with the DJI 30-watt charging block. So that would not be if you plug in the USB cable to your computer. If you plug this into a computer, DJI doesn't comment on what the charging time is, but it's likely going to be slower than that. However, what I'm going to do is I've got a charging block here from Anker, and I'll talk about this later with the accessories, but this charging block right here, if I plug it in, it's going to charge us really quickly. So while we're continuing to talk here, I'm going to plug this in just to make sure we don't lose the battery charge. All right, so now that I've got that plugged in, I'm going to continue here. So yes, this is the battery charge up here, and it shows you what percentage is left on it when it's plugged in and charging. Over here, if you swipe from the left, this is going to show you the different modes. So you can toggle between them this way. I'm going to keep it set to video. And down here in the lower left is going to show you what mode you're in. So that's another way to switch it up. If you click on that, that symbol down here indicates time lapse. So we're going to go back to video mode. Really like the icons that DJI has on here. I think that's something that they do really well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to record just a quick clip here. I'm going to stop recording. So now that I made that small clip there, if you click on this icon right here with the play button, it's going to bring up that sample clip. And then you're able to watch it here. And of course, it's a very short clip. So it's just going to play for a split second there. And then to get back out of playback, all you do is swipe left like this right here. And it's going to take you back to the main screen. And when you have more than one clip, if you want to look through them all, you're going to click up here, and it's going to show you a whole list of them that you can go through. In this case, I just have that one clip right now, so that's all it's going to show. So the charging is indeed quite fast. We are up to 43% already. This camera does get warm, quite warm in my hands while it's doing that charging. That's not surprising, that's pretty normal. Because that battery is charging up rapidly. So when you swipe up from the bottom, this is where you're going to get a whole bunch of settings that you're going to use depending on the mode you're in. So what I want to do is I want to go to the video mode first. This is going to be the mode that this camera is going to be used for most of the time. So we can either swipe up or click at the bottom there. For video, I always recommend having it in 4K 16:9 if you don't want to do any editing later on. If you do want to do some editing, there are times where you may want to keep it at 4K 4:3. It's going to give you a little bit more flexibility to crop that footage while editing in your finished product. So you may want to do that, but if you want a clip that's ready to share straight out of the camera, I recommend doing 4K 16:9. Now, as far as frame rate, you do have some options here, quite a few in fact. So if you're in the United States, generally you're going to choose either 24, 30, 60, or 120. What frame rate you choose is going to depend on what you want to do with that footage. If you have a clip where you want to make it slow motion later on, and you want it to be slowed down by either 4 or 5 times, you're going to want to film it in 4K 120. That's going to give you maximum flexibility to make that clip slow motion later on. If you're not going to do slow motion with it, or you just want a little bit of slow motion, then I recommend doing 4K 60. You can then slow that down by 2 times or a little more than 2 times if you have a 24 frames per second timeline. If you have a 30 frames per second timeline, you can slow it down by 2 times. Then if you have footage and you just want it that normal speed, you're not going to want to slow it down at all, then you would do either 30 or 24. Now, 24 frames per second is going to be that real cinematic type frame rate. That's going to be typical of what you see in a lot of movies. But if you want that television channel frame rate that you see in a lot of TV shows, and kind of one of the common action camera standard frame rates, you would select 30. I personally prefer a 24 frames per second timeline for the finished product, but 30 is also a very common standard. 24 and 30 both look great. Now, if you don't know if you're going to want to slow your footage down later on, I recommend doing 4K 60. 4K 60, you can always put that on a 24 frames per second timeline, and it's going to conform to that and look great. Or you can put it on a 30 frames per second timeline. But if you film something, you're like, oh, I really want to slow that down later on. If you film it in 24 or 30 frames per second, you're not going to really have that option. So if you're just looking for a single resolution and frame rate to film all of your footage in most of the time, unless you have a special use case, then I recommend doing 4K 60. So for now, I'm going to leave it here at that 4K 60. Up here in the upper right, you're going to have the rock steady option. I recommend having rock steady on at very minimum. There's not really a reason not to have stabilization on, unless you're using ND filters with this, which I'm not going to get into today, but I will talk about those in a future video on this camera. You do, of course, have the horizon balance option, which allows you to turn the camera up to 45-degree angles. If you get past the 45, you're going to notice that it lets go of that there. When you're at 45 or less, it's going to keep that, which is very cool. If you do that, it's going to introduce a little bit of a crop to the footage. So if you do have a reason that you want to keep your horizon steady, I recommend keeping it set to horizon balancing. If you don't, then you can't go wrong with rock steady. Rock steady is my default go-to, unless I have a reason to do the horizon balance. Because you'll notice when we turn on horizon balance, it's going to introduce a crop. Crops it quite a bit. And I don't like that crop in general. I like to have that maximum flexibility. When it is set to off, you will see it's a little bit wider than rock steady, but rock steady does not have much of a crop. And that little bit of a crop is more than worth it. So I'm going to swipe back out of that. And what I want to do first of all, before I go to the other modes, is we want to click on this right here. So this is where we have our Pro option. And right now, by default, it's set to Basic. And Basic does not allow you a lot of options for settings to change. We want to do Pro because there are some very key settings that we do want to change to get the best possible footage out of this camera. So when I select Pro there, you see a lot of additional options that show up. I'm going to disconnect this now. We've got more than enough charge. So first thing we want to do here for the exposure, we want to keep that set to auto. We're going to click confirm. For the white balance, now this camera does have a sensor on the front here, right there in the O of action. That's supposed to be pretty good at detecting the white balance and adjusting it. But It can make your clips look bad if it's like changing in the middle of it. And oftentimes it will do that. Like if you're in bright sunlight, it won't always know how to adjust that automatically. So if you're gonna be filming in the middle of the day outside, I recommend 5500K for the white balance. If you're gonna be doing filming at sunset or sunrise, I recommend going up to 6500K. And then if you're gonna be doing some low light nighttime filming, I recommend doing 3200K. 3200K would also apply for indoor type filming. That's generally gonna look good with that indoor lighting. But I'm going to go back to 5500K as my default because 5500K is gonna be most of the situations I'm filming in. We're just gonna click confirm. For the color, you've got a couple options here. The D-Cinelike is gonna kind of be that flat profile, and that's gonna be if you wanna do some color grading later on or selectively add back color so it's not oversaturated. I usually recommend sticking with normal if you don't wanna do any editing. That's generally gonna do really well for you. And by the way, it's worth noting that this camera currently has 8-bit color, but DJI has said they will be releasing a firmware update in the near future that will add 10-bit color to this. Now to explain the difference between 8-bit and 10-bit, 8-bit has 16 million different color shades, which initially sounds like a lot, but 10-bit color has 1 billion different color shades. So when they add 10-bit color to this, that's going to have the potential to have a lot better dynamic range and a lot more flexibility later on with that footage, and the footage in general is probably going to look a lot better. So when that is added to this, that D-Cinelike is going to become even more valuable for those of you that want to edit the footage. But even if you don't want to edit with normal, it should still look even better once DJI has added that 10-bit color. For the field of view, you've got a couple options here. There's the standard, which is the D-warp. This is the linear, where the lines are gonna all look straight. There's not gonna be any of that fisheye effect. If you do the wide, you can see the bend there. And that's gonna be good for underwater, of course, they mentioned here on the side. Wide is also good if you want that field of view that shows what's going on around you a little bit better. The subject in the middle, if that's you or someone else, or an object that you don't want heavily distorted, it's gonna distort the least in the middle, but toward the outside edges, it's gonna distort quite a bit more. And DJI also added the ultra-wide field of view here now, which is really great. This is gonna be great, like if you're mountain biking, if you're skiing, if you're doing something where you want that true field of view that action cameras are known for. Action cameras are known for that ultra wide. This is purely a preference matter for you, which when you set it to, you can of course toggle between them depending on what you're filming. I recommend the standard D-warp if you want all the lines to be straight and to not have any of that distortion. This is great if you have a lot of people in it. You don't want them to look highly distorted, or if you're doing like a lot of buildings in a city and you don't want that bowing effect in them, if you want the lines to be nice and straight. So you have those different options. Generally, either the standard or the ultra wide are gonna be my two go-tos. The wide is kind of in the middle, but generally if I'm gonna go wide, I might as well just do ultra wide and get that full true wide field of view. And then if I'm gonna do linear, standard D-warp, I'm just gonna go with that. So for now, for the default, I'm gonna do ultra wide. And if we click on this button right here, this is gonna give us some of our audio options. Generally, I recommend leaving these as they are. It's a good idea to do the wind reduction. This camera does have several microphones located around it, including down here. And I recommend keeping that set to stereo and wind reduction on. And you can do directional audio as well. So if you're gonna be purely at the front of this camera talking to it, you could keep it set to front. And that way it's not gonna pick up any sound from behind the camera. So it's either directional off or directional on. And when directional on, it's going to only be the front. Next, let's do the photo mode here. So for photo mode, we're gonna go down here. For the aspect ratio for photos, I generally recommend keeping that at 4:3. That's that typical photo resolution. I like doing 4:3 because then it uses the entire sensor. And for the countdown here, this is gonna be if you wanna count down so you can run and get in front of the camera. So if you're shooting with like a group of people and you wanna be in there for the photo, then you may want to set that to something like 10 seconds. You can run and get in front of the camera. But otherwise, I don't recommend turning this on. There's no reason to have a countdown for most other situations. And we want to go over here and adjust some parameters. For the exposure, I generally recommend keeping that set to auto. That's going to usually give you the best results. White balance, same thing. For a photo, that's not as big of a deal. For field of view, you've got a couple options here. If you're going to have people in it, you may want to use the standard dewarp, or if you're taking pictures in a city and you don't want the buildings to have a fisheye effect to them. But otherwise, I recommend doing wide if you're going to be doing landscapes or that type of thing. It's a fairly common use case for photos on this camera. And then for the format, if you want a photo straight out of the camera that you don't have to edit, then you're going to want to use JPEG for the format. If for any reason you're going to want to edit that photo later on, then I recommend using RAW, because RAW is going to give you the highest quality to work with when editing. But since we're talking about straight out of the camera best settings today, I'm going to keep that at JPEG. So next we're going to go to Timelapse, and we're going to get the Timelapse mode set up. This is also how you get to Hyperlapse, by the way. So for Timelapse, DJI does have some pre-configured settings here already. One of them is for clouds, which would be during the daytime, and the other is sunset, and then they have custom. Now, I recommend doing some custom presets here. There's nothing wrong with the pre-configured ones necessarily, but you can get better results with just a few tweaks here. So we're going to click into custom. We're going to swipe up. So whether you're doing a sunset or a daytime time lapse, I usually recommend the interval to be between 2 seconds and 5 seconds. So right here at about 3 seconds is kind of a happy medium. If you want to know approximately how long your finished product's going to be, you can swipe through here. So if you were to film for 10 minutes, your finished product is going to be 6 seconds at a 3 second interval. So it's really nice how DJI kind of calculates these for you. So if you were to do 5 second, you would get a 4 second resulting time lapse. But then of course, if you wanted a little bit longer time lapse, you could set the interval to film for an hour, 2 hours, or you can decrease the interval. Either of those is going to get you a longer time lapse. What I generally recommend for this though is I recommend keeping it at an infinity. That way your time lapse isn't going to stop at a pre-configured time. It's not going to stop until you tell it to by pressing this button, or if your battery runs out of power, which we'll talk about an accessory later that'll help prevent that. But for clouds or sunsets, I recommend, like I said, 2 to 5 seconds. For sunsets, I recommend 2 seconds because that's going to catch all of those different colors fading, and you're going to get the most detail there to work with. That way, if you want to speed up your clip, or if you want to take part of your clip later on when you're exporting, you have a little bit more material to work with. If you're doing clouds during the day, something like that though, I recommend doing 3 or 4 seconds or even 5. If you're going to have it rolling all day or for several hours, I recommend 5. If you want to do like an hour or 2, then I recommend 3. So for now, I'm going to keep that at 3 because 3 is kind of that happy medium here. And we're going to click the back arrow. And up here in the upper right is resolution. We want to make sure that's on 4K. There's not really a reason to do 1080p or 2.7K. 4K is going to give you the highest quality, and you want to have that. Even if your finished product is going to be shared as 1080p, you want to have that 4K resolution. It's going to look best. And what I want to do is I want to swipe down here and I want to go over here to adjust a few of these parameters. So for the exposure, we're generally going to want to keep that set to auto. And the reason for that, if you set it to manual, it forces you to select a shutter speed. And the problem with that shutter speed is when your light is changing during the day with clouds and sun or at sunset, if you have a set shutter speed, it could mess up your time lapse. Your time lapse could look too bright, it could look too dark. And so the only way to have an auto shutter speed here is to click auto. Because unfortunately at this time, DJI does not separate out that shutter speed setting from some of the other settings here. It groups them together. And it does let you adjust the EV comp, which can sometimes be useful. But if you're sticking with the auto shutter, I just recommend keeping the EV comp set to 0. But if you find that it's blowing out your highlights, then you want to go a little bit negative here. Either -0.3 or -0.7. But probably -0.3 most of the time is going to serve you well. if you find your highlights are getting blown out. If the big focal point for your time lapse is clouds, then I do recommend doing -0.3. That's going to help preserve the detail in those brighter whites a little better. Your highlights are going to look good. And if you're doing a sunset, that -0.3 is also going to look good as well. For the ISO, you're going to want to keep that set as close to static as possible. Now, unfortunately, DJI does not let you set this to a single value here. In order to do that, you have to go manual here, which then requires you to set the shutter. And like I said earlier, there can be some problems when you set that shutter. So I recommend keeping it 100 to 200 for the ISO range here. That is the lowest range you're able to use on here. When you do the 100 to 200, it's going to help ensure your lighting does not change due to ISO in any significant manner during the time lapse. As it gets darker, your camera is going to bump up to 200 for the ISO. But if you have it set to a broader range like this, it's going to change big time. And it's going to look really bad. And it's also going to get grainy as you get toward the end. So I recommend these settings right here, changing the EV comp to -0.3, and then changing the ISO range to 100 to 200. We're going to click confirm. And for the white balance, if you're doing a sunset, you want to set this to 6500K. That's going to look great with a sunset. It's going to really make those colors pop. If you're doing just a daytime time lapse with clouds or something else during the day, you're going to want to do 5500K. Now, most of my time lapses are going to be 5500K, so I'm going to keep it set there as the default. And then for the field of view, I recommend keeping wide. Wide's going to get you the most details. If for some reason you have stuff that you don't want fisheye for, then you can do standard D-warp, like a cityscape, something like that. But generally wide is going to be the best, so I recommend keeping it set to wide. Then for the format, you can do either video, or you can do video plus JPEG, or you can do video plus RAW. So that is one thing that I like DJI, how they do it. They do give you the best of both worlds. So you can have both the photos and the video. That way, if you decide later on down the road you want to do a photo edit of that time lapse to get even better detail out of it, you can have the RAW. Generally, if you're going to want to share a time lapse straight out of your camera, you're obviously going to want to have video here. And I don't really see a good reason to do JPEG, because if you're going to edit later on, you want to have RAW, because RAW has the most detail anyway. So I recommend doing video plus RAW. It of course is going to take up more space on your camera. So if that is a concern, just do video here. But if you want those photos for whatever reason later on, do video plus RAW. All right, so now that we have keyed in all of those, we're going to swipe down and we're going to save this as preset C2. So it's going to confirm here that we have time lapse, the 3 seconds, the infinity, the video plus RAW, and the 4K 16:9. We're going to click confirm. And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a night lapse mode. So we're going to click over here, get back to our time lapse, and we're going to key in those settings. So first thing we're going to do is swipe up. We're going to go to custom. And for the interval for night lapse, that is more so going to adjust when we set our shutter speed. But generally for night lapse interval, you're going to want somewhere between 20 seconds and 30 seconds if you're doing stars. If you are doing a cityscape or something at nighttime where you're very close to it and it's quite bright, then you're going to want to have the interval down lower. But the interval for now, leave it set to 20 because it's going to adjust anyway when we change our shutter speed later on. And then for the video duration, I recommend keeping that set to infinity so that it doesn't stop before you want it to. Because for a night lapse, I generally recommend letting it go all night long. And of course, for our resolution, we want to have 4K. We want to have the highest quality. That's especially important with night lapses. Let's click over here and adjust some parameters. So for the exposure, we're going to want to click the M here because we're going to need to change some values. So if you are doing a night lapse and it's a very, very dark sky, there's no moon, you're not near a city, you're in a very dark place, you're going to want to drag this all the way down to 30 seconds for the shutter speed. you want that shutter open as long as possible to capture as much light as possible from the stars. Now, of course, during the daytime, if you do this, everything's going to be white and washed out. But in nighttime, it's going to be great if it's really dark out. If you do have a moon in the sky, at least a partial moon or a full moon, you're going to want to go down to 15 or 20 seconds here. And if you're close to a city, then you're going to want your shutter speed set to something like 5 to 10 seconds in most cases. This is going to be if you're doing like a cityscape at nighttime. So you're going to want to do in that range. But for the sake of this, we're going to assume we are doing a dark nighttime sky. So we're going to put 30 seconds here for the shutter. And then for the ISO, we want to set this to a static value. And 800 is what I recommend. If you do 1600 or higher, you start to get a lot of grain in the footage and noise, and it looks really bad. So I recommend not going any higher than 800. If you find that your night lapse is still too dark at 800, because this is for no edit settings, you could bump this up to 1600 and see how it looks. You might find that's better, but I generally recommend 800 as the best value there. We're going to click confirm. For the white balance for night lapses, we want to set this down to 3200K. I feel like that's the best color treatment for those. We're going to click confirm. And then for the field of view, I recommend having this wide, unless there is a reason to have standard dewarp, but wide is good because it gives you the most detail in there and you don't have any of that cropping taking place. We're going to keep it at wide. For the format, for night lapses, I recommend keeping it at video plus raw. So now that we've got that set, we're going to save our final parameter. We're going to click save to C1. We're going to confirm everything looks good there. We're going to click confirm. And then finally, we're going to go here to Timelapse. We're going to swipe up and we're going to set up our Hyperlapse settings. So for Hyperlapse, generally for the rate, I recommend keeping it set to auto here. This camera is pretty smart about how that works, and it's generally going to select a good speed for you. But up here for resolution, you want to set this to 4K. You want to have the highest resolution hyperlapse possible. And then we want to go over here, we want to tweak a few settings here. For exposure, I recommend keeping that set to auto. For white balance, we want to change that to 5500K. For outdoor, daytime, hyperlapses, 5500K is going to give us our best results. Field of view, I recommend keeping that set to wide or ultra wide. The standard dewarp, I don't usually see a good use case for that unless you're going down like something like a city street. But even then, with a hyperlapse, it's generally going to look better to have at least wide or ultra wide. So I actually like to use ultra wide with a hyperlapse. I think that looks best. So we're going to keep it set to ultra wide. Color, I generally recommend keeping that set to normal here because our plan is not to edit this footage later on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up and save that hyperlapse as well. We're going to save that to C3. Those are all of the modes here. What I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to go back here and I'm going to save a couple of my video modes as well. So under video, we've got our defaults that we plugged in here, and I want to save that as one of the presets. And then to save that preset, I'm going to swipe down, I'm going to go up here. We're going to save this to C4, and it's going to confirm that it's video 4K 60 with Rocksteady on 5500K. We're going to confirm. And then I want to do one more preset, and this one is going to be with the 4K 120. So we're going to do that there. We're going to go over here. Field of view, we of course can only go as wide as wide. We're going to set that ISO range, just make sure that's good. It is. We're going to click confirm. Then we're going to swipe down. We're going to click this here, and we're going to save it to C5. Yep, everything looks good there. A couple things I want to note. There are a couple settings that are not here right now that DJI is probably going to add later on via firmware. So what I want to do is I want to mention how I would configure those settings so that this video is still relevant and useful to you if you're watching this after DJI has added those. The first one is going to be the 10-bit video, what I mentioned earlier on. So once DJI adds 10-bit, it's probably going to be available under this menu or it's going to be one of the settings up in here, probably under this one. When that is added, I highly recommend turning on 10-bit video. It's going to offer a lot more color shades to your footage, 1 billion to be exact, versus the 16 million with the current 8-bit color. So enable 10-bit any place you can on here, any of the modes that it's offered. It may not be offered in the 120, the 4K 120, but it should probably be offered in other modes. That's my best guess. But yes, wherever you can enable 10-bit, definitely enable it. And then the other setting that's missing right now is sharpness, which is kind of a bummer because I don't like my videos to be too sharp. I think it makes them look bad in a lot of settings. And so it'd be nice to be able to set the sharpness to that low or that medium instead of it being too sharp. So you can always add sharpness later on if you film a video with low sharpness. You can't take the sharpness away. That's very hard or impossible to do. If DJI offers an option to adjust the sharpness, I highly recommend setting it to either low or medium. For no edit footage, low or medium is going to look good. It's going to depend on your use case. If you're not sure if you should do low or medium, then you can do medium. That's kind of a happy balance. But if you don't like your medium, if you think it's still a little bit too sharp, set it to low, and you'll probably find that you like how the low looks really well. So hopefully DJI is going to add that in firmware later on. That would be great. So we're all set now with all of our presets. We've got them all here. They're all keyed in, ready to go. We've got our Nightlapse preset here. We've got our daytime and sunset time-lapse setting there. We've got our Hyperlapse setting here. We've got our 4K 60 setting there. We've got our 4K 120 setting here. We've got our photo settings right here under photo. Under the main video setting, we've got our 4K 24 with dewarp standard on. Under slow motion, we've got our in-camera 4K, 4x slow motion, which is 4K 120, but it'll automatically make it a slow motion clip for you. And then finally, we have our hyperlapse setting right here. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this camera out. I'm going to film a bunch of footage on a hike today. And then I'm going to get back here and we're going to go through how to edit some of that footage with the app. And then I'm going to share a couple minutes of that sample footage with you so you can look at the various footage from this camera. And then finally, I'm going to show you some accessories that I recommend using with the DJI Osmo Action 3. All right, so I'm now back from my hike with the Osmo Action 3. I shot a bunch of footage on that hike, and I'm going to show you a couple minutes of that sample footage that I filmed with this camera. That way you can see what that footage looks like. Let's take a look at that footage right now. we're going to open our DJI Mimo app. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to connect to my camera. So I'm going to power that on. And we're going to take a look at a couple sample clips, and I'm just going to show you some basic editing that you can do with this app. So the first thing you want to do is when you turn it on, it's going to say it discovered it, and it's going to connect automatically to it, which is great. It's going to prompt you to join the Wi-Fi network, and then it's going to finish connecting. And once it's connected, it's going to tell you that there, and it's going to show you the camera on screen. So what we want to do first here is we want to click down here, and we want to take a look at the clips on here. I filmed a lot of footage today. I wanted to get some really good testing in. It's just a clip walking along the trail. It's a fairly long clip. It's 42 seconds. So generally you're not going to want to share just a single 42-second clip. You know, it's going to be a lot of the same thing going on. But what I wanted to do with this one is I wanted to download it and show you some different things you can do with this. And this would have been a 4K 60 clip. All right, so once it's downloaded, we're going to go back here. We're going to go to Editor. We're going to click on Pro, and we're going to click on that clip, and we're going to click Add. So now we have a lot of additional options. So you see here, we can scroll through. And I kind of like this clip at the end where my son took off running toward the shelter. So we're going to start right here. And what I want to do is I want to do a cut. So it's going to show you, you can drag from either end to trim the clip. We want to cut out this whole beginning section. So when that's selected, we're going to click Delete down here. And we're going to get rid of that. So now we turn that 42-second clip into a 13-second one. So now if we play it back, it's a lot less footage to work with. So what else we can do here is we can change the volume. If you want it to be louder, you can do that. Generally, I just recommend keeping it at 100. That's usually going to work well. The speed, we can do some cuts here. So what you can do, the nice thing is you can drag the speed up or down. So you have slow-mo options here. And if you want to make it slow-mo, you drag it down. So maybe I want to make this part slow-mo where he's running. So let's keep it slow-mo for a little while there. And then I want to go back to normal speed right about there. Which is nice because you can adjust the steepness of the ramp. You can put it way down to there. You can make it a quick one where it jumps down quickly. So if we drag back and play it, you can have it slow down quick. You can have it slow down gradually if you bring this back up. So in this case, I want it to dip a little bit there, but then I want it to go back to normal speed. And if you click on Custom, that's going to, of course, be the default custom that you've done. But if you want to, there's montage, there's hero moment, there's bullet time. I actually think hero moment would work well for this. So it speeds him up and it slows him down, and then it speeds him up again. So pretty cool. I like that. So I'm going to keep with hero moment, and I'm going to click the check mark. You've got a bunch of options down here. You can add some music. If you click add, there's a music library that DJI has, which is great. So you could pick any of these. You could add them to your clip. That's a great feature to have. You can do filter. If you want to add a filter, you can do that. I kind of like this filter right here. So I'm going to add that and put it down to about 50. I'm going to click the check mark. And then we're going to go back to filter. We're going to do color. If you want to adjust anything, again, you can do brightness, contrast, saturation, etc. all the way over. There are some glamour effects as well. So there is a lot of features in here that you can mess with. For the color, I'm going to keep it as is. I like how it looks. You can add text to it if you want to. You can type it in. Then you can change the font, the style. You can do a whole bunch of stuff there. I'm not going to add text to this clip, but if you wanted to, you could easily do that. And then if you want to reframe this, you also have that option. So you can crop this, you can zoom it out. You've got a bunch of different options here, which is very cool. And if you click this at the top, you can change your aspect ratio. So if you want to share this to a platform that supports 1:1, you could click that. If you want to do 3:4 or 9:16, you also can do that. Once you select that and hit the back arrow, you're going to have to zoom it and frame it for the 1:1. You can see the box there, but it's going to require you to do the framing, which is great. You get to choose how you want to do it. Just make sure there's not the black borders left around it like that. Make sure you do fill it out. So you don't want to see any of the red. If you see red, it means that there's still a black border that you haven't filled out the full aspect ratio. So when you do that for the 1:1, that's what you would see there. The 9:16 would be if you want to do an Instagram post or a YouTube short. So when you select that, again, we're going to do a cropping here. And we're going to expand that up. And an easy way to do that is you click down here and it's going to autofill right down here in the lower right. So generally that's the best idea to do. And then if you need to fine tune it from there, you can do so. So yeah, I like how that looks. It looks great. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click export. And it's going to offer you 2 resolutions for the export. I recommend going with the 1080p. 1080p is going to look best. And I'm going to uncheck the public because I don't want to share it. And save draft, I'm going to uncheck that as well. I'm going to click save only. And it's going to save it to my device now. So yes, I highly recommend using the editor and clicking on Pro. It's going to give you the most options to work with, and you're going to have a lot of flexibility there. All right, so next I would like to talk about some accessories that I recommend for the Osmo Action 3. I'm going to go through a couple of these accessories and I'm going to explain why I recommend them and what function they serve. So the first thing I want to talk about is the case here. This case I mentioned briefly when we did the unboxing, but I did want to show you how to put the camera in the case. So initially when you lift this tab here on the top, it almost seems like this should open up here and fold out, and then you pop the camera in. But you actually don't have to do that. The nice thing is you just strip it up, you pull on the arrow, and then your camera is going to seat right in here. And you're just going to make sure the power button lines up with the power button on the camera, and then you're just going to clip that down. Super easy to do, and you still have access to the USB-C door right here when you have the case on, but you do not have access to the battery door. So if you need to change the battery or pop in a different MicroSD card when you're filming, you're not able to use that when it's in the case. And that's why I generally don't recommend having it in the case unless you have a use case where you need to have it in the case. One such use case would be if you want to film vertically. So this camera does do vertical filming, and what you would do is you put the mount here on the bottom, and as with horizontal, the DJI is going to face toward the front of the camera, the logo on the mount. If you try to mount it the other way, it's not going to work. The magnets are going to repel. So you could do this, and then you could use the camera for filming vertically like this. So that would be useful if you want to film a YouTube short or a video that you want to share on Instagram. You may want it vertical. And if you do vertical native out of the camera, it's going to be a higher resolution than if you do horizontal and then crop it later on. So that would be one recommended use case where you would want the case on, because you can't mount the Osmo Action 3 on the magnetic mount here vertically without the case. But otherwise, if you don't have to mount it vertically, I don't really recommend having the case on. The case doesn't increase waterproofing or anything like that for the camera, because obviously it's wide open. So I generally recommend having the Osmo Action outside of the case. So another accessory that I recommend is this Ulanzi Octopus tripod here. So the nice thing about this is you can take one of these mounts that you can use for action cameras with the thumb screw, and you can put it on here, and then you can mount the Action 3 onto here. So we'll put the magnetic mount on the bottom of our camera, and you can easily mount it on here just use the thumb screw that came with the camera. You can attach it right here. The reason I like this Ulanzi tripod is, first of all, you can use it as a tripod. So if you're out somewhere and you want to set up your Action 3 to do a time lapse, or if you want to put it out on this for a night lapse, it's easy to fold out and it's ready to go. The other thing I like about this is you can mount this in areas where it's hard to have a place to set your camera. So let's say you're vlogging somewhere and you want to talk to your camera for a while in the woods. You can easily put this around a tree. You can bend the legs to tighten it and configure it. You can also do something like this to have it set down lower. And then finally, you can straighten these back out and you can use this as a grip for your camera. So if you want to do some maneuvers like this, where you want to do a swift pan, or you want to do this, or pan down, or just holding it like this, or for talking to it like this. It's great to have one of these. These are very versatile, and this particular one I think only costs like $20. I found it to be a great investment, and you also can adjust how the camera points. So you can spin the camera 360 degrees here, and you can also change the angle here. So you could do that. It's very flexible and useful. You just tighten it once you have it set where you want it to go. The next item that I recommend having, I recommend this Anker external battery pack. So if you're going to be doing lengthy time lapses or night lapses, you're going to need external power. Otherwise, your camera is not going to stay powered more than a couple hours at most. So this Anker one right here, this particular one will power this camera for days. You can have this camera left on doing a time lapse or a night lapse for days. Now, if you're doing video footage, constant filming, it's not going to last for a couple days. But if you have this going where it's just taking that one photo and putting it together into a time lapse or a night lapse every 5 seconds, every 20 seconds, something like that, this is going to power it for a long time. And by the way, I've linked to all of these accessories in the description below in case you want to check any of them out. But all you do with this is you plug it in here on the side in the USB port. You open it up, you plug it in. And by the way, this is also great for quick charging the battery in here. So if you don't own more than one battery, or even if you do own more than one battery and you want to give this a quick charge, as I mentioned earlier, the battery in here will charge from 0 to 80% in 18 minutes. And that's with a 30-watt charger that DJI provides. But I tried this out today in the woods because my battery was getting low, and I only have one battery at this point. So I tried it out, and sure enough, this did the fast charge as well. So I plugged it in, 20 minutes later, it was up to about 85%. So this is really handy for that use case too. So if you need to take a break from whatever you're doing to give this a quick charge, you can have a nearly charged battery in about 20 minutes. So really useful for that as well. Now it is important to note, if you have this plugged into here, this is not going to be waterproof because the door is going to be open. So if it's going to be raining hard outside, or if it's going to be snowing and there's a risk of water getting down under here, then I don't recommend leaving it out in those conditions. It's possible that a USB pass-through door could be created for this camera at some point. If it is, that would be great because then you can just pop off this door. The doors do pop off, by the way, I didn't break it. And then you could replace it with another one that has the opening here just for the cable. It still wouldn't be waterproof, but it would be a little bit more water resistant than with the door wide open for that port. That being said, it's not a huge gap here because it is just enough for the cable and a little bit to the side. So unless you're in really heavy rain, or if this falls into water, it would probably be okay. And of course, the battery door does detach here as well, just so you know. And speaking of power, an additional accessory I recommend is just one of these Anker wall chargers. So like I said before, if you plug this into a computer to charge it with the USB-C cable, it's not going to charge as fast as if you plug it into a wall outlet or an external power supply like this. So I recommend, this is an Anker power charger as well. And I like this because it's handy. I use it with a variety of devices. I've used this to charge my iPad, my iPhone, some other devices too. And all you do, you just plug it into the wall, and then you plug in the USB-C cable right here. And I tested this anchor wall charger out, and it does indeed do the quick charge. And the other item I recommend is this mount right here that you saw me screw onto the Ulanzi tripod earlier. And it's just this simple little mount here. Now you can use this with a lot of action cameras. It doesn't just work with the Action 3, but this cost $9.99 and it's made of metal. So a lot of mounts like this one that came from DJI, this is made of plastic material. And I realize this is a sticker mount. It's one to stick onto a surface, but the smaller ones like this are generally made of plastic, and the plastic does crack, usually after a couple times of attaching it to a tripod mount like this. This metal one though, I've had a couple of these for about 5 or 6 years now, and they're still going strong. So for $10 for one of these, I highly recommend it. It's great, it holds up over time, and it works really well. And the final accessory that I recommend having with your Action 3 is the DJI Wireless Mic set. So if you haven't seen this before, it's a case here and it's got a receiver, it's got 2 individual microphones in here, and those microphones feed back to the same receiver. So you could have 2 different people talking on those, and then you could have it plugged into your Action 3 here via the USB-C port. And it's going to pick up both of those voices. So this is a highly recommended accessory if you're gonna do a lot of vlogging, because you're gonna have really good audio from the camera. Now the audio is improved on the Action 3. I think it's better than it was on the original Action or Action 2 by far. But the sound is still only gonna be so good natively from the camera. When you're getting the sound from an external mic like this, it's gonna sound a lot better. And it's gonna take your vlogging sound to the next level. And like I said, it's also great because you can have 2 different people wearing the wireless mic. It's gonna record their voices into that same feed. So then later on, when you export your videos, it's gonna have all that audio right there in the video file. This case, of course, also does double as a charging case for the mics. It will charge them up when you're on the go. And this has a pretty good sized battery inside here. So when you're done with your mics, you pop them back in here, you close the case, and it's gonna keep charging them. And speaking of charging cases, I don't have it in hand right now, but DJI also has a battery charging case that looks very similar to their wireless mic case. And that battery charging case can charge 3 batteries simultaneously, and it functions in the same way. It's got an inside battery in here that can charge them on the go. So if you're gonna be taking this Action 3 on long adventures, maybe multi-day backpacking trips, something like that, I definitely recommend picking up that charging case and then a couple additional batteries. Now I have batteries in the case on the way, they just have not arrived yet, but I generally recommend having at least 2 batteries for your action camera. So I'm gonna have 2 for this. But if you get the charging case, it supports 3. So I recommend just picking up 2 additional batteries so you have the full 3 to take advantage of that case. And those are the accessories that I recommend for the Action 3. So I hope you found this detailed unboxing, best settings, editing, sample footage, and recommended accessories helpful. My goal is to provide you with a great overview of this camera so that you can get the best possible footage and have the best possible experience with this camera.